Good morning, family. It's Wednesday, September 18th, 2019. This morning we're looking at Jeremiah chapter 14. And there was a couple different things going on in this chapter that would have been possible for us to discuss this morning. It starts off with the acknowledgement that Israel is in the midst of a drought, and people have it says in verse 3 they've been put to shame and humiliated, and they cover their heads because they've sent off their servants for water, and they come back empty handed. Then it talks a little bit about how the people of Israel love to wander and and go around to all these different idols and gods, and they're never satisfied, and then it talks about how they have stored up teachers for themselves, prophets who essentially tickle their ears and tell them the things they want to hear, and they don't tell them hard things. They just tell them, for instance, verse 13. These false prophets that they store for themselves tell them, "You will not see the sword, nor will you have famine, but I will give you lasting peace in this place." And they love that. They love to hear about peace and prosperity. But what I wanted to speak to you about is verse 10. This idea that Israel loved to wander. Boys, if you recall from history last week, we talked about nomads and how nomads were people that would move into an area. They would forage and scrounge around and for berries and nuts and perhaps wild game in an area. And when they'd used up all those resources, what would they do? They would move and wander to another area and look for more resources. And this is how they survived. They would go from one place to the next, always wandering, never keeping their feet in check. And for them physically, that was a necessity, because resources like berries and fruit and maybe like wild vegetation that was edible, those things were they were renewable resources. They would grow back in a season or so, or however many seasons that particular plant needed to grow. But in the short term, they were once you ate it, it was gone. So you had to move on to find more food. Well, the people of Israel were, in a sense, spiritually, they were wanderers. Rather than being content with Jesus, with their heavenly Father, with the spiritual provision that He provided, which was endless. Okay, the spiritual blessings, the joy and the peace that God provides is from a fountain that is without end. There is no end to it. It always satisfies. It always fills the person. It will always provide peace and joy. But Israel was not content with that, and so they would wander, and they would store up for themselves idols out of, we've read before, they'd make them out of wood and silver and gold and anything else that their imagination could create. They would make these little gods for themselves, and they would bow down to these and worship them and adore them, and they would turn to these worthless things to save them and for peace and for comfort, always wandering to and fro, back and forth, never keeping their feet in check. And it was idolatry. That's what they were guilty of. You know, we see that over and over again. And so we see that God, he does not share his glory with another. He is not going to play second fiddle to idols. You know, it's, you shall have no other gods before me, he says. And so for wandering Israel, he rejected them. He's the one that brought this famine. He was about to bring the sword upon them and carry them into captivity. And it was because of their idolatries. It was because of their sins. And because of their wandering feet. And so, for us, as Christians, on this side of the Babylonian captivity, on this side of Christ being crucified, as members of the church, those that the Bible would say are true Israel, those who have been circumcised of heart, this is something that we need to be aware of, that the tendency is still for us to want to wander, to want to look for peace and comfort and satisfaction and joy from things other than Christ, to look for our salvation in places other than in Jesus Christ. That's a temptation for us, to wander. And it's something that's very subtle. It's not as if we're, buying up a bunch of gold and making a little cast out back, and we're melting the gold down and pouring it into the cast and making a golden calf, right? It's not as if we're down in the basement at night carving blocks of wood into little household idols that, we can keep in our pocket and carry around with us. That's not our tendency to wander and worship idols isn't that pronounced. We would look at that and say, "Oh, that's so superstitious. Those silly people making idols. Did they really think that block of wood was going to save them?" We would look down our noses at that notion that, oh, we don't worship idols. No, our idols are much more subtle. They're much more they're sneaky. Okay, and Israel had this problem as well, but for us, it's our idols are more along the lines of things that we take for granted, things that we use every day, things that we look to for entertainment and for physical enjoyment, or our idols could be things that you look at the world, and the use of these things is widespread. Everybody's using this. Everybody's looking to this thing or this product or this activity to bring them joy and satisfaction. And that's not to say that anything that we look to for entertainment or anything that we look to for some kind of physical comfort, that doesn't mean that we're looking at it and worshiping it as an idol. But my point is, and we talk about this a lot as we read through Jeremiah, because idolatry is kind of at the forefront of what much of Jeremiah is prophesying against. But what I'm saying is, it is very easy for us to fall into a pattern of, you know, having comfort. Okay, we live in a very wealthy nation. The poorest among us live in relative comfort compared to poor the poor, elsewhere. And so, to give you an example of something that could be an idol for us, it's our comfort. Okay, it's the relative comfort and peace that we enjoy in our home, living in Jeffersonville, and you know we don't go hungry. We have clothes, we have food, we have transportation. I have a job, and so all these creature comforts are taken care of, and God provides for us these things. But for us, the temptation could be to look to that job, or look to the peace and the comfort we enjoy, and think, oh, those things are what are giving me my joy in life. That is where my value is fixed. That is where my hopes lie. Because without the job, or without the peace, or without the comfort and ease that we enjoy, there is no hope. There is no satisfaction in life. And so, do you see how we can quickly begin worshiping the things God gave us to use and enjoy? We can quickly begin worshiping these things as if they are the source of our peace and our joy and our satisfaction. And we wander. We'll wander around, maybe not physically, but we can go from one idol to the next, to the next, to the next, and seamlessly looking for something to titillate us, looking for something to satisfy us, looking for something to bring us some kind of peace or comfort, or to occupy our mind, or whatever the case may be. And and what it does is it shows that we are not content, we are not satisfied by God. He is our hope, He is our peace. And so we ought to examine ourselves. We ought to look at, you know a lot of I think a lot of Christians, and I think this is probably where we get into trouble a lot of times. A lot of Christians simply float through life, and they don't examine themselves. They don't question, why is it that I'm doing this? Why is it that I'm allowing this into my home? Why do I, when I engage in this activity, or when I purchase this product, or when I go to this place, what is my motivation here? Am I seeking to glorify God? Does this thing glorify God? Am I giving thanks to God for this? Can I give thanks to God for this? You know, Asking these questions about you know what it is that we are allowing into our lives. A lot of Christians just float through life, and they just let it all in, and they just immerse themselves in stuff, and in things, and entertainment, and activities, and they don't consider that that perhaps they're showing themselves to be wanderers. And so let's examine ourselves today. Let's look and see, are we is our heart's desire to worship at the source, Christ, He is the source. Okay, He is our peace. He is our salvation. He is our Redeemer. He paid the penalty for our sins. He He sustains us. He's our Creator. He is everything. Do we worship Him? Do we worship at His feet, or are we wanderers? Are we looking for some other quick fix? Are we looking for something to tickle our ears? Are we looking for something to satisfy our lusts and our passions here and now? Or are we content with Christ? Are we using the good things He gives us for His glory, or are we seeking to just simply have our lusts and our passions satisfied above all else? So that's really the question we must ask ourselves today. Pray you have a blessed day today. I want you all to know that I love you very much, and be diligent. Set your mind on the things above today. Okay, don't, in this life, we need to be deliberate. We need to be intentional about our movements and our activities, and what we set our minds on and what we focus our eyes on, and we need to be intentional about that. Okay. We need to make plans and strategize and plot out our day with the realization that we're going to make plans, but God is going to direct our steps. So let's be faithful to be diligent and to make the best use of our time today. I'll talk to you guys later. Love you very much. Bye bye.